Emmett was calling me. Just whenever he felt like it, he would pick up the phone, and I discouraged that because that was a long-distance call. And I reminded him that he could write. And while he was at Papa Moses' house, he wrote me 2 letters. And in these letters, he would tell me what a wonderful time he was having, and the things that they had done and the things they were looking forward to doing. And it seems like he wrote me one of these letters on a Friday, and Saturday he was supposed to be going to Uncle Crosby's house. And somehow that got switched over to Sunday. They were going to leave Sunday after church instead. And of course, before day Sunday morning, that's when the invasion took place. Mm-hmm. But had they gone Saturday, as they had purpose to do, he would have been able to avoid this confrontation. A day before he left for Mississippi, I gave him his father's ring. And when I gave it to him, he really expressed a lot of excitement over getting Lewis's ring. And he put it on his finger, and it fitted, because Emmett was kind of stocky, but it was a little bit loose on his finger, but not enough to hurt. And you would see him ever so often looking down at his hand. And when he got ready to leave, when he departed from me at the train station, he said he was going to keep the ring and show it to his friends. Now, this is the last letter that I received from Emmett. It's dated August 25th, 1955. Dear Mom, how is everybody? I hope you and Jean are fine. I hope you all had a nice trip. I am having a fine time. We'll be home next week. Please have my motorbike fixed for me. This is one of 2 letters that I received from Emmett. We never lost communication because he was calling, and I had to discourage the calling because he was calling collect, and he didn't have any limit on the time he was using. So I reminded him that, you can write me a letter. And this was the 2nd letter and the last letter that I received from him, which was probably on Saturday morning. And he was taken out of the house before day Sunday morning. And I didn't hear about it until 9:30 Sunday morning. I received a telephone call at 9:30 Sunday morning. It was from Moses Wright's oldest daughter, Willie Mae Jones, the mother of Curtis Jones. And evidently she had received a call from Curtis telling her what had happened. She called me, but she was so hysterical until I couldn't understand what she was saying. And I told her to hang up. And I called my mother, who lived close by, and asked her to go over and see what the world was wrong with Willie Mae. And my mother called me back to let me know that Bo had been kidnapped. Oh my goodness, I don't really know how I felt. I wasn't really frightened, but I was very apprehensive. I kind of thought these men, whoever they were, would take him and give him a real good licking and bring him back to Papa Mo's. It never occurred to me that they would kill him. But I jumped out of bed and I made up my bed. Then I called Gene. He lived about 8 blocks away. And I said, Gene, I want you to take me to my mother's house. And he had to either get public transportation, a cab, or walk from where he lived to where I lived. But it seemed that he got to me so quickly. But by the time he got there, I had notified Uncle Mac and Aunt Magnolia downstairs. I had called the news media, every newspaper I could think of, and I didn't call any TV stations, but they picked up the story. All I knew to do was call the newspapers. And the Daily News wanted to talk to me at length, and I told them to meet me at my mother's house, which was on the west side, gave them the address. When Gene got there, I was ready to go. And Gene was stopping at every stop sign and stopping at every red light. And I didn't have time for that. I told him to move over, pull over. And Gene did what I asked him to do, and I took the wheel. And he said, "Oh, you're going to get a ticket. The police is going to stop you." I said, "Well, I hope they do. Then they can put the siren on and get me to Mama's house faster." Because there was no stopping. I had to get to Mama. And when I got there, surely enough, the Chicago Daily News was there. They were waiting on the steps for me to arrive. I didn't find out any information. I mean, every place I called, it was a block there. They didn't know anything. The people that we knew personally, they had to go to church. They couldn't help us with the situation. And I mean, everybody was preoccupied. I couldn't get the governor right away. I finally got him, but I couldn't get the sheriff. It was almost mission impossible. It was as if Mississippi had been sealed off with an iron curtain. I mean, there was no information coming out of there whatsoever. I didn't even call any black people for help. I was calling on white people that we knew. And Mr. McFall, he was quite he was of renown in the neighborhood. And Mr. McFall told me, he said, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to look after that now. I'm on my way to church." And so I guess he went on to church. And everybody we called had something they had to do, and they could not change their plans. I found out from, not United Press, what is the other one? One of the news agencies.
Associated Press?
Yes. One of the news agencies called. And they wanted to speak to somebody in the house except me. And I knew immediately what they had to, it was as if I had something telling me what was going to happen next. And I told him, I said, "Sir, there's no one in this house you can talk to except me. And I want you to just give me the news slowly so I can write it down. I don't want to make any mistakes." Well, he would not talk to me. Associated Press, that's who it was. And he wanted to know, did I have any friends? And I gave him the name of my friend in Argo, Illinois, Ollie Williams. And he called her and gave her the story. She, in turn, called me back. Well, I was the one who was answering the phone. I was manning all the telephones. And she wanted to speak to my mother. And I said, "Ollie, the message you have, you cannot give it to my mother. You've got to give it to me." I said, "Mama can't take it." And I said, because I want details, and nobody is going to take the details as I will. And she finally was persuaded to give me the message. And she described how his body had been found, how Moses Wright had identified him by the ring on his finger. And she told me about the gin fan that was around his neck, wired with barbed wire around his neck and the other end to that huge gin fan. And he was thrown into the Tallahatchie River. But by some accident, he had become tangled with some undergrowth, and the body couldn't continue to float down the river, and the foot just went up. One of his feet went up above the surface of the water. And there was a young white man, John Hodges, who was fishing with his dad. And he spotted that foot, and he told his daddy that there's somebody in the river. Well, the search for Emmett Till had become very intense. And when the sheriff came down, he immediately sent for Moses Wright. And Moses Wright came, and he said that he couldn't tell it was Bo by looking at him. But when he saw the ring on his finger, he said, yes, that's him. That's his ring. And that is the way he identified Emmett. Oh my God, those words were like arrows sticking all over my body. And I had had this visitation by this little white dove who had told me, I will lead you, I will guide you, I will take care of you. All you have to do is obey. And as Ollie was talking to me, I was trying to write, and I would stop her ever so often because my eyes were so full of tears until I couldn't see. And I needed to clear my vision, and then I would go back to writing. And she was so reluctant to give me that information. She wanted to talk to my mother because my mother was the force in the family. But I had looked at my mother and I realized that my mother, this is one thing I was going to have to do. Mother could not do this one for me. And when I began to make the announcement, that Emmett had been found, and how he was found, the whole house began to scream and to cry. And my mother fell prostrate on the floor. And the people that were able to, they were around her. They had just sealed her in. And I stood up and went towards her. And as I approached her on the floor, I felt a surge of something like electricity coming from her to me. And I stepped back because it seemed that if I stayed there, I would zap all the life out of her body. So I moved back, and I began to tell the people, give her air. Get from around her, get her head up. I was telling them how to take care of Mother. And that's when I realized that this was a load that I was going to have to carry. I wouldn't get any help carrying this load. Yes, when the sheriff summoned Moses Wright to the riverside, and when Papa Mose identified Bo by the ring on his finger, Sheriff Strider gave the body to, told Moses Wright to take the body, and it had to be buried before the sun went down that night. And Moses Wright was very obedient. He took the body to the church cemetery. They had dug the grave, and they were preparing to put Emmett in the grave when Curtis spoke up and said, "Granddaddy, are you going to bury Bo without talking to Mamie?" And that stopped them. They ceased operations. And he said, "I need to call Mamie." And his grandfather told him, "If you can get a call through, go ahead and call her." And they waited to see what Curtis would be able to do. But he went to home after home after home, mostly white homes in the area, and no one would allow him to use the telephone. In the meantime, when we got the word and I was able to get the house quieted down, I told them, "It's something we have to do, and I don't know what it is, and you're going to have to help me think." And I was telling them how futile it was to be crying. I said, "We don't have enough tears to cry for Emmett Till. The world will cry for Emmett Till." And my aunt spoke up and she said, "Call the undertaker. Call A.A. Rayner." Well, we did that. And A.A. Rayner is the one that reached the people, the right people in Mississippi, and laid claim to the body. But he was very skeptical. He called back and he wanted to know. He said, "It's going to cost $3,300 to get the body out of Mississippi." And he wanted to know, could we pay it? And I told him, "Mr. Rayner, regardless to the cost, I want the body." I said, "If I live, I'll pay you. If I don't live, somebody else will pay you. You will get paid." And I was able to live up to that promise. When we buried Emmett, enough money had come through my hands that I was able to pay him in full, and I had about $250 left, which I put in a savings account. They wanted to get it in the ground as quickly as possible. They didn't want nightfall to catch that body unburied. Oh, that's obvious. The way that body had been mutilated, they didn't want anybody to see what those devils had done. That was something to be hidden. It was not to be advertised. It was not to be photographed. It was not to be even heard of anymore. Just bury this body and let's get on with our lives. But they wanted that body in the ground as quickly as possible. They didn't want any fanfare about it at all.
Okay, great.
And they had no intention of letting the body out of Mississippi.
What do you mean?
They were not, shipping that body to Chicago was not something they intended to do. And it took the intervention of a white undertaker that A.A. Rayner communicated with, and he in turn went to the black undertaker who was a subsidiary of his, they had a white and a black branch. And it was through the white owner that we got the body on the train. I was told that the train wouldn't take the body because of the odor. And, I was told a lot of impossible things. But I didn't waver. I said, "I want the body. I want the body." And when the body arrived at 12th Street Station, I went down to receive the body. And to my surprise, there were hundreds of people there. And when I looked up and saw this huge box, it was almost as if the box crushed me to the ground. And one of the things that was foremost on my mind, I wanted to see. I had to see what was in the box. And it was then that I was told about the affidavits that had been signed, the Mississippi seal that was on the big box, the box inside that one, and the third box that housed the casket, all of these had seals and padlocks on them. And it was not to be opened. And Mr. Rayner tried to explain to me that he would be in trouble with the Mississippi authorities if he opened the box. And I didn't care anything about the Mississippi authorities. I wanted to get in the box. And when he just told me he couldn't do it, I reflected a moment and I asked him, Mr. Rayner, do you have a hammer? And that kind of startled him. And he wanted to know, what are you going to do with the hammer? I said, I haven't signed anything and I haven't made any promises. And if you can't open that box, I can, because I'm only expecting one box with a casket inside. But there was a box within the big box, and then another box was inside the second box, and then the casket was inside the third box. And when Mr. Rayner agreed to go into the box, that's when we found all of these other padlocks, 4 padlocks in all, and everyone with the Mississippi seal on it. We went to the train station, the 12th Street station, Illinois Central, and we were waiting for the box, for the body to be brought into the area where we were. And all of a sudden I looked up and there was this huge box. It looked almost as if it were the size of a freight car. And a really ugly box, but so big. And I wondered, why such a huge box? And I later found out that it was one of 3 boxes, because there was a box inside the huge box, and the huge one had a seal and a padlock on it. The box inside it had a seal and a padlock. The third box had a seal and a padlock, and inside the third box was the casket with a seal and a padlock. And I was told that the only way the body was released to come to Chicago was that affidavits were signed and promises were made that the box would not be opened. And of course I objected to that immediately. I mean, when I went up, when I saw the casket, it seems as if during that time, between then and the time I actually looked over in the casket to see what Bo looked like, I had a sensation that every bone had turned to steel. And I looked, I mean, the sensation was so intense until I looked at myself to see, could I see the physical changes that were taking place in my body. And my father and Jean were on either side of me to hold me up. And I told them, turn me loose. I said, I'm not going to faint now. I've got a job to do. I've got to try to figure out what this is. And they had, when I looked inside the casket, all I saw was a huge something in a body bag with a lot of white pellets all over the body, all in the bag. And I told Mr. Rayner, I said, I can't see what's in the box. I mean, you're going to have to wash it off so I can see it. Well, they were very patient with me. They took the body to the back of the casket of the funeral parlor, where they dress the bodies, where they present them, get them ready for presentation. And they took him out of the body bag, and they washed him off, and they called me back and let me look at him there. And when I glanced at his face, I had to turn away. I just couldn't look him in the face. And I remember I started at his feet and I checked certain checkpoints all the way up until I got to his neck. But one thing I observed was that he had not been castrated. He was all there. But that rumor has persisted that he was castrated and his intimate parts stuffed in his mouth. Well, that was not true. I felt that that box was on top of me, crushing me to the ground. I felt the weight of that box. And I was not prepared to see anything so huge. And I had no idea how I would feel when I observed what he was returned to me in. I was totally unprepared for that. They didn't want me to look, but I had to look because I had to be sure that I was going to bury Emmett. I mean, even, with $3,300 staring me in the face, I didn't want to bury nothing or somebody else. I wanted to make sure that I was burying Emmett. And that was the whole idea behind seeing what was in the box, because I realized they could have filled it with bricks, they could have put mud in it, it could have been somebody else's body. I had to know for sure. Even my father didn't want me to look. Nobody wanted me to look at Emmett, but I had to look at Emmett. I mean, how he looked was not the issue. I had to make sure I had Emmett, and that was the only way I could be sure. I started at his feet, and there were little things that I could identify on my way up to his head, because after all, I'd been bathing him for a long time. I had to stop at age 5. He would let me bathe him after age 5. So when I paused at his midsection, I got a little jolt because I knew he would not want me looking at him. But I saw enough that I knew he was intact. In fact, there were very few blemishes on his body until you got to his neck. And all of the scarring, all of the beating was about his head. And I saw that his tongue was choked out, and it was way down below his chin. And it was such a big tongue. I didn't know human beings had tongues so big. And as I came on up, I noticed that there was the right eye was lying on midway his cheek. And I noticed that his nose had been broken, like somebody took a meat chopper and chopped his nose in several places. I looked for this eye and it was gone, just as if somebody had picked it out with a net picker. And I went back to examine his ears, because his ears were not attached to his face and the end of it curled up a little bit. And I couldn't find the ear. I only found a portion of an ear. And I wanted to know, where is that? As I kept looking, I saw a hole, which I presumed was a bullet hole. And I could look through that hole and see daylight on the other side. And I wondered, was it necessary to shoot it? It seemed like that was the final insult, the shot through the head. But I also noticed that the forepart of his face and the back of his head were separated. They had come down over his head with a not an axe, but a hatchet. That's what Willie Reed, I think Willie Reed said that. And the front of the face and the back of the head were in separate pieces. And Mr. Rayner asked me, he said, "Do you want me to touch the body up?" I said, "No, let the people see what I've seen." I said, "America needs to know what is going on in the South." And I turned to Gene. I said, "Gene, what are your thoughts?" He said, "Well, that's Bo, all right." He said, "Because I'll never forget his head." He said, "And I gave him that haircut." Gene was his barber. So not only did I have my verification, I had Gene's as well. When I glanced Emmett's face, I had to turn away. I could not focus on his face. And I decided then that I would start at his feet and work my way up, maybe gathering strength as I went. And when I got to his ankles, I noticed those little sharp bones in his ankle. Okay, that was Emmett's ankle. And I came on up his leg until I got to his knee. And his knees were like my knees. He didn't have knobby knees. A lot of people have knobby knees, but he had flat knees. And I said, "Those are his knees." And I came on up to his midsection. And I just paused long enough to note that he was still intact. Nobody had castrated him or anything like that, as the rumors had it. And I kept on up until I got to his chin. And then I was forced to deal with his face. And that's when I noticed his tongue hanging below his chin. And I noticed that the size of the tongue, it was unbelievable. It was bigger than the tongues that my mother used to cook, the beef tongues that my mother used to cook. And I was amazed that a human being's tongue would be so big, but I don't know if that was due to the body being waterlogged or what it was. But I moved on up from the chin until I saw the eye that was lying, dangling from the eye socket and about halfway the right cheek. And I looked on the other side, and that eye was completely out, as if it had been picked out. I noticed the bridge of his nose, which had been, it looked as if it had been chopped. And from there, I went to look at his ear, the right ear, because I was on the right side. And I noticed that the part of the ear that I was looking for was missing. And I wondered, where is his ear? And I couldn't identify the ear because it was non-existent. But I saw this bullet hole around the temple area, and I could see daylight through the bullet hole. And I wondered why. Was it really necessary to shoot him? Because by then he should have been dead. That body wouldn't, he wouldn't be able to take all of that punishment and yet be alive. But I also noticed that the front of his face and the back of his head had been chopped with something like a hatchet. And the face and the back of the head were separated. Now there's a picture that was taken by Jet magazine, and on the left side you can see all the thread they used to sew the back of the head and the face back together to make it one unit. And Mr. Rayner asked me, he said, "Do you want me to touch the body up?" I said, "No, Mr. Rayner, let the people see what I've seen." I was just willing to bear it all. I think everybody needed to know what had happened to Emmett Till. And but when I came back that evening, I was amazed at how much better he looked than when I had seen him. The eye was gone. The tongue was back in his mouth. His mouth was all pooped out it was protruding. I saw the stitches on the side where they had sewn him back together. And I turned to Mr. Rayner. I said, Mr. Rayner, you have done a beautiful job. And he looked at me, but from what I had seen previously, he had done a beautiful job.